There are 39 categories of prohibited activities for Shabbat, the 39 Melachot. And by not doing these things, we're making a declaration that Hashem created the world, and by not manipulating His creation, we are declaring His ownership. These 39 categories are derived from the activities that were required in building the tabernacle in the wilderness, the Mishkan. Since we were commanded to cease from building the Mishkan on Shabbat, it stands to reason that we are to cease from these types of activities that went into building the Mishkan. There are previous videos that cover the 11 Melachot involved in baking bread, and 11 of the 13 Melachot involving making fabric for the draperies and the clothing of the Kohanim of the Mishkan. This video will cover the final 2 Melachot for fabric making, and these final 2 are called Tofeir, sewing, and Korei'ah, tearing. There are 2 reasons given for why sewing was necessary for the covers of the Mishkan. One view is that it was needed to sew the pieces together to get the width that was needed. Another view is that there were no seams in the covers. They were all woven as one piece, but the sewing was required for repairs. For both of these views, the premise is the same, that of combining 2 separate objects into one entity. So Korei'ah is the opposite of Tofeir, and is tearing in order to resew or for a constructive purpose. Now, Tofeir, or sewing, involves more than simply sewing. Tofeir includes any method of combining any 2 separate items into one single entity. Of course, any sewing using needle and thread would be prohibited on Shabbat, or sewing by machine. But this would also include gluing any 2 items together, whether it's cloth, paper, or wood. And these are all included in the Shabbat prohibition. Reattaching binding tape on a book, pasting or sticking photos into a photo album are examples of activities that would also be prohibited on Shabbat. Stapling 2 pieces of paper together would be a prohibition, since you're trying to connect them together as one entity. Also, sealing an envelope using paper stickers or stamps are also activities that would be prohibited. There are some activities that may appear to be in violation of Tofeir or sewing because they do attach 2 items together. However, these are permitted to perform on Shabbat. The examples of these are the use of zippers, Velcro, buttons, snapped and snapped. The use of zippers, Velcro, buttons, snaps, and safety pins are generally permitted on Shabbat because this is the designed function of these items. Zipping the lining into a coat is permitted on Shabbat. Using Velcro fasteners for shoes or clothing or slip covers is fine to do on Shabbat. Using a safety pin to temporarily secure the hem of a dress or a skirt is also permitted, a nice option when you can't sew if that hem is hanging down. Then using an ace bandage and fastening with the clips is permitted. And since adhesive is not usually permitted, it is permitted to use an adhesive bandage on Shabbat because it is designed for that function, and it's also very temporary. It's going to be removed shortly. Using disposable diapers is also permitted because the tape that's used to secure them is really designed for that purpose. The problem may come into play when the diapers are removed and we have a tendency to fold them up and use those same tapes to secure it before discarding it. That would make it a permanent adhesive. So when you're discarding the diapers, you'll want to think about that. Now, Korei'ah is the tearing that was done on the fabric in the Mishkan. The tearing was done for a constructive purpose in order to repair, in order to put something together. So the tearing that has a constructive purpose for us is prohibited on Shabbat. And that would be tearing paper towels off of the roll, or plastic wrap, or foil from the roll on Shabbat, because you can't really use these items unless you tear it off, so you're really constructing something useful by tearing. So before Shabbat, I usually will tear off several different lengths of aluminum foil, put them in the cupboard, tear off some saran wrap, and of course we can use tissues instead of toilet paper or pre-tear the toilet paper. It usually doesn't end up being much of an issue on Shabbat. Also for paper towels, inexpensive napkins can work just as well. So what tearing is permitted on Shabbat? Well, tearing open food packaging in order to get to the food inside is permitted on Shabbat. So tearing open a bag of chips is fine. Tearing open boxes of other needs that you have for Shabbat, such as tissues. Often those do come with perforations, and you'll want to avoid tearing the tops off of the packages along the perforations. That's going to be in a future video. There's also some packaging that includes a resealable flap that has adhesive that's intended to be opened and resealed multiple times. So it's perfectly okay on Shabbat to open these packages and to reseal them. So what all these acts of tearing have in common is that we're tearing in order to get to what's inside the package, not to create something useful, because what we usually do with what we've torn off is throw it away. We're not using it for anything. There are some questions that come into play when opening milk cartons, plastic milk bottles, and soda bottles, since these do involve creating vessels that could be used for something else. You'll want to ask your rabbi about these items because there are some variations depending on your particular heritage. I hope this has been helpful to you in understanding the Shabbat prohibition of Tofeir and Korei'ah, sewing and tearing. This is part of our demonstration to ourselves and the world that Hashem created the world and it belongs to Him. He gave the Shabbat to us to make it a special holy day, and we acknowledge that the world is His by refraining from manipulating His world for our purposes. It also helps to give us a very peaceful, relaxed Shabbat, that we are not met with any distractions, and we can focus on our spirituality, our true, deeper purpose in life, our families, and our friends. So continue on your journey of Shabbat, and again, continue learning the torch.